so happy to be here speaking with you all. I did a project out in Pembroke Savannas in Pembroke, Illinois that I'm going to be talking to you about today. And then I also did an art show that was sort of in response to those experiences that I had out in Pembroke Savannas. So I did a project basically combining the sciences and the arts. So today I just want to talk to you about how I believe that combining science and art is a really effective way to reach the community, and it's kind of a superpower in the sciences, and just my experiences using those things. So, just to give you a little introduction about me, I'm Paige. I don't know most of you here, so I just want to give you a little background before beginning. I went to Olivet Nazarene University, which is a little school in Kankakee, Illinois. And oh yay, there's my presentation.
We
So
just
there
start.
I studied zoology and studio art. So I was right off the bat kind of integrating both of those areas of study into what I was doing. Cynthia, you can go to the second slide if you don't mind when you're ready.
Okay.
Yeah,
Woo!
perfect. And then you can click just through the slide if you want. You can put everything on there
Yes,
at
you
once.
tell me what to do. I'm here for
Yeah,
you.
for sure. Thank you. I was also a part of ONU's honors program. And so, based on that, I was doing some special classes during the first 2 years of my time there at Olivet. These were like interdisciplinary classes and very discussion based. And then the last 2 years of my time in the honors program, honors students will do what they call like a scholarship project. So that's basically a project where you're doing a investigative project on like a topic of your choosing. So sometimes for some students that looks like a research project. For some students that looks like maybe doing a survey or doing an art project. I really wanted to do both an art and a science project for my scholarship project, so that's what I decided to pursue. You're also supposed to have a faculty mentor. And because my project had two parts, I had two faculty mentors actually. So my faculty mentor for the scientific portion of my project was Dr. Derek Rosenberger, who I believe is somewhere in this call, so hello. And he helps me with my scientific thesis, which was called Avian Acorn Herbivory in Midwestern Oak Savannas. As Cynthia had mentioned, that was where I was going out into Midwestern Black Oak Savannas and trying to figure out what acorn species those acorn-eating birds out there preferred. And then I worked with Professor John Seals, who is the head of Olivet's art department, on the art side of my project. And then Cynthia, you can click one if you want. Um, and I did a an art show that was based on my research out in the savannah that was called Savannah Stories: Memories from the Midwest's Most Endangered Ecosystem. And you can go to the next slide. Perfect. So we'll begin. The way I'm going to format this presentation is I'm first going to go over the scientific part of my work, then I'm going to go over my art show, and lastly, I'll talk about some concluding remarks and some ways that I've been integrating art and science moving forward. So let's begin with part one, avian acorn herbivory in Midwestern oak savannas. Thank you. So a little bit of introduction. You can go to the next. Um, if you want to go to the next slide, thank you. These are what a black oak savanna looks like. So these are some pictures that I took out in Pembroke. Pembroke, Illinois is known for having some of the last super high quality black oak savannas left in North America. So I was really fortunate to be going to school like 30 minutes away from these beautiful savanna lands. And then just a little introduction on black oak savannas. Midwestern savannas are extremely threatened, so it's estimated that there's only about 0.02% of historic savanna lands left, which is super concerning, especially considering they support high levels of avian biodiversity. So, studies have shown that savannas support more species richness than do open or forested habitats alone. Savannas are what we would call like an ecotone, so it's sort of an in-between from a really open ecosystem like a prairie and then a more forested habitat. So savannas, they occupy unique characteristics of both of those ecosystems as well as their own unique characteristics as an ecotone. You can click. Yeah, thank you. And then savannas also host savanna specialists, which are different organisms that rely specifically on the unique characteristics that savannas have. So, one of the resident savanna specialists that was very prevalent where I was doing my research is the red-headed woodpecker. They are beautiful birds. However, unfortunately, they've been decreasing by about 2.5% since 1996. And so, definitely, I was seeing how important savannas were to these beautiful birds. It's often cited that part of the reason for their decline is because these savannas are becoming more obscure. Okay, so I was looking at some past research, of course, to sort of set my grounds for some of my objectives for this project. Something I knew going into things is that there are many savanna birds that seasonally rely on acorns as an essential food source. Oftentimes, they're relying on acorns during the fall and winter, so it's a seasonal food source for them when insects are less abundant and available to them in the environment. However, there is very little known about what birds in savanna ecosystems specifically prefer. There have been studies done on birds in different habitat types, so definitely I was looking at those past studies to kind of get a groundwork for what different birds desire when they're foraging for acorns in different habitats. You can click a few forward. Thank you. So yeah, I was definitely asking, what do we know about acorn preferences of birds in other habitats? And when looking through some research that had been done, I found that in forested and urban environments, it seems that blue jays tend to prefer small acorns, so size is a very prominent selecting factor for them. And they especially like those pin oak acorns when available to them, which are smaller acorns in size. Tufted titmice are a little bit less straightforward. They have more variable preferences. However, they've shown a preference for pin and whites over black oak acorns. So again, going for those smaller acorns. And then red-headed woodpeckers chose black over white oak acorns. However, they were only seen making selections in one study. And it's important to note that in this study, there were no pin oak acorns that were offered to them. So they were only choosing between those black and white oak acorns. So then my objectives became what we don't currently know. And one of those main ones are, what are those acorn preferences of red-headed woodpeckers? Again, we only saw them making acorn selections in one study in the past, and clearly they're savanna specialists, so I was very curious about that. Another thing was acorn preferences among birds in savanna habitat specifically. So again, we know quite a bit about the acorn preferences of a variety of birds in other habitats like forested or urban habitats, but we really have no past knowledge on what these birds would be going for in savanna habitat specifically. And then kind of along with that is, would preferences for pin remain the same in a black oak savanna? So again, we're working in a savanna where most of the oak trees are going to be black oak trees, and most of the acorns that birds will have available to them in that environment then are black oak. So I was very curious if that preference for pin would remain the same. And then lastly, how season and bird species affect preference. So, will different kinds of birds prefer different things, or will the preference for different acorns change depending on the season in which birds are doing their selection? Okay, so let's move on to my methods. So, what I actually did to answer these questions. So this is like an overview of the Pembroke area. Pembroke is a little town, very agricultural. It's towards the border of Indiana and Illinois, on the Illinois side. And like I had mentioned briefly, Pembroke is really a special place because it has some of the highest quality black oak savannas that are left in the Midwest. So I did my studies across 6 sites, and across 3 different savanna locations. So the first location was Sweet Fern Savanna in that green box. The second is Pembroke Savanna in the blue box, and then Muskota Land and Water Reserve is marked by that pink box. I did 5 trials. For my first 3 trials, my fall 2023, winter 2024, and spring 2024 trials, my sites looked very much like that top figure there. So I had two sites in each of those three savannas. For my last two trials, the fall 2024 and winter 2025 trials, things looked very much like that bottom figure. So I made the decision to move sites 5 and 6 from Muskota to Pembroke and Sweet Fern simply because Muskota wasn't really having a lot of bird activity in those three first sites or three first trials. And I wanted to make sure I was getting as many data points as I could, so I moved them. All right, and then also, of course, to make this project happen, I was testing acorn preference, so I had to get acorns. So I collected a few thousand of each of these acorn species. Pin oak, black oak, and white oak were the species that I was collecting, and I collected those from Sweet Fern Savanna. So they were acorns that were actually um, grown, I suppose, in an actual savanna setting. So, just to get an idea of size, pin oak acorns are definitely the smallest of these three acorns. Black and white oak acorns are similar in size. However, white oak acorns are a bit more massive and a bit more oblong in general. But that's generally what we were looking at there. So again, so you can get an idea of the proportions of those acorns next to each other. You can see them right there next to a penny, just to get an idea of scale. I chose white, black, and pin oak acorns because those were the three types of oak trees that were present in Pembroke savannas. I very much wanted to simulate the sorts of choices they would be having in the wild, and so I didn't want to add in like an extra acorn to the mix, just because that wouldn't be representing what they're actually choosing from in their savanna ecosystems. In order to present these acorns to the birds, I built these big acorn platforms. Each of these platforms held a tray up. So there were 6 platforms in total because I had 6 sites. And that picture there, you can see kind of an overview of a tray. That tray had 9 different sections. I painted each section a different color from its neighboring sections just so that when I was looking at my trail camera footage, I was able to distinguish which section was which. Since I was dealing with 3 different kinds of acorns, each acorn species occupied 3 different sections that were non-adjacent on this tray, and then those trays were held up by a 1.5 meter high PVC pole. The PVC pole, I wrapped aluminum flashing around it. The reasoning for that is because I didn't want to know like what squirrels and rodents wanted to eat, and I know squirrels are really great climbers, so they can't grip onto the aluminum flashing, and that kept them off the trays completely, which was really great. Above the trace were 1.5 meter tall conduit poles, and this like structure held up my 2 downward facing trail cameras. So this is the video footage that I was collecting. If you click it again, Cynthia, it might play, hopefully. If not, yeah, there you go. So this is the kind of footage that my trail cameras were ideally getting. So they were motion triggered, so when a bird flew onto the tray, it the cameras would trigger and start taking a video of whatever behaviors it was exhibiting while on the tray. Um, you can see that this blue jay has decided that it wants to play with its food instead of taking it. This was very common, especially with blue jays, where they would take acorns and roll them off the tray. So I was really grateful to have field foot or actual like video footage as opposed to photographs because with still photos, I wouldn't be able to tell what acorns were actually being taken off camera with the intention of eating or storing away, and which acorns were just kind of being thrown around and played with. All right, and then there were some other steps involved here. This picture is me heat treating my acorns. So all of my acorns that I collected went through a heat treatment and also were float tested. The goal of this was to make sure that the acorns were intact, that there were no acorn weevil larvae inside of the acorns, which they feed on like the meat of the acorn, and that can be like a selecting factor for birds. They'll select for or against that. I didn't want to deal with that, so I just made sure that they were all weevil free. I also took a random like sampling of 100 of each species of acorn and measured and masked them, and those were those measurements that you saw on that previous slide. All right, I also looked for the present bird species in the area at each of my sites. I did this by doing like a point count. I did 2 point counts per site per trial that I did, and this just gave me an idea of what birds actually were present around each of my sites at each of the savannas. And then I also looked at acorn availability and quality, and I did this by taking random samples of the ground basically around some of the mature oak trees around each of my sites and counting the acorns in those plots and then also making a quality estimate for those. Okay, on to my results. So what do we actually find? This figure shows the bird species that I saw present in my point counts. So each colored line is a different kind of bird that I saw during each of the 5 seasons in which I did my work. So a couple that I want to point out to you. For one, of course, is the red-headed woodpecker. That's that reddish brownish line you see. You can tell that red-headed woodpeckers were super, super abundant across all 5 trials. Um, they were definitely super present there around my sites. Another thing I want to talk about are blue jays, which are represented by those greenish lines next to the red-headed woodpecker line. And they were also seen across all 5 seasons. We definitely didn't see as many of them in winter and spring 2024, but they were definitely there. They were definitely present. And then the last acorn-eating bird species that I wanted to just bring to your attention is the tufted titmouse. They are represented by those yellow lines at the end of spring 2024 and winter 2025. We only saw them in 2 seasons in my point counts. However, we do know that they were there and they're also acorn eaters, so they were also a bird of interest in my study. So, as far as the birds that we saw actually visiting, there were only 2 species that came to visit and also made acorn selections, and these were the blue jays and the tufted titmice. You'll notice that there are no red-headed woodpeckers here, despite red-headed woodpeckers being very present in my point counts, but we'll talk about that a little later. First, I want to talk about what selections these birds were making when they came to my trays. So this figure basically just shows all of my trials and all of my sites combined together. You can see that overall, birds had a huge preference for pin oak acorns over black and white oak acorns. Black and white oak acorns were selected, but to a much smaller degree, and I wasn't able to pick out a ton of trends when breaking that up down between species. But definitely pin oak acorns blew the other two out of the water. If we break that up now, between blue jays and tufted titmice, and also between the different seasons that I did my study in, you can see that blue jays definitely made most of the selections, and again, their selection for pin remains much higher than their preference for black and white oak acorns across all of those seasons there. Especially in the first 3 trials, they were selecting black and white oak acorns, but they were to more variable degrees and definitely lesser than pin. Something to note is that in fall 2024 and winter 2025, I actually didn't have white oak acorns as an option for them. And the reason was because the white oak trees in the savanna that year weren't masting, so there weren't enough acorns to collect from that species, as well as they wouldn't have really had much access to white oak acorns in the wild anyway. And again, I was trying to simulate that natural environment that they would be having. For tufted titmice, they only really came and made selections in the spring and fall of 2024. However, something interesting is that 100% of the selections that they made were for pin oak acorns. They didn't touch the black or white oak acorns at all, really. Okay, now let's discuss. So what does this all mean? Why is this important? Well, first of all, pin oak acorns, we can tell, were selected the most, and it didn't seem to matter the site, the season, or the species of bird that was doing the selecting. They seem to go for pin all the time. Blue jay preferences in the savanna seem to be very similar to those past studies that were done in different habitats. It seems that even though we're in a black oak savanna, blue jays still prefer those those pin oak acorns when they're available to them. And then lastly, pin oak acorns again seem to be really important components of these ecosystems to savanna birds, which is a bit surprising. Again, being that they aren't the dominant oak species by any means in these environments. However, when available, it seems that they're very attractive to birds, which is interesting. As we're going forward, maybe thinking about conservation goals and how to ensure that our remaining savanna habitats are really friendly places for our birds. Maybe keeping pin oak trees around is a really great way to do that. Okay, and now the question of the hour. Where are all the woodpeckers? Here are again my data points for each of my seasons and each of the numbers of woodpeckers that I was seeing across all of those seasons. You can see that they were in very high numbers present around my sites. However, they didn't come to platforms at all. It wasn't like they were coming to platforms and just not selecting an acorn. Simply, they didn't even visit. I never saw them on the trail cameras. So I do have a couple hypotheses for this. One of them being that red-headed woodpeckers could be maybe a more neophobic species in general. Neophobia basically means a fear of new or novel objects, and certainly my acorn trees don't quite resemble the trees or the ground where they would normally be foraging or caching their acorns away. So maybe they were more wary of going to this potentially dangerous place in order to get food. However, something interesting to note is that there was a study done in 2022, and I actually modeled my platform design off of that study. And they had a couple dozen red-headed woodpeckers coming to their trays and making selections. So I'm not sure why they would be more wary of my platform design and not of that almost identical platform design that was done in 2022. So it's definitely still a question that's up in the air. Yeah. So next, let's move on to part two. We'll transition now into the art portion of my project. Again, I hosted an art exhibition based off of this work that I did called Savanna Stories, Memories from the Midwest's Most Endangered Ecosystem. And before I get into what I did specifically, I kind of want to talk about why I chose art as the vessel for communicating scientific knowledge to a local audience. So, one of the main reasons is because environmental topics are extremely accessible in art. Art has been a muse for people across all cultures, across all generations, since artists were a thing. And art is a very visual place, so it's definitely an easy place to draw inspiration for visual art. Some of my favorite artists use things like feathers and mud and insects to create beautiful installation pieces. And when I was trying to figure out what I was going to do personally, they were huge inspirations for me when figuring out how to turn the savannah into an art piece. Another reason is because art has proven to have impacts on the public. There's been many surveys that have been done about how art engaging in environmental topics affects their public audience. One of the ones I always like to call out is this art festival called Floating Land. This art festival is done every year in Australia, and one year they did a study kind of interviewing the viewers of the art after they had walked through the exhibitions. And the results were that over half of the viewers of the art felt a deeper connection to the land, and then nearly half of them wanted to change their environmental behaviors for the better. And I think those are pretty great odds that I definitely wanted to play with as well as I was um, trying to figure out how to make an art show and bring the public into that. So this is some angles of the gallery that I did my work in. Um, this is Sims Gallery at Olivet Nazarene's School of Art and Design, and this is where I was able to host my art show. So this is what I actually did. I'm going to talk through just a couple different elements of what I did. The first one being this mobile that you see in the center of the room. Cynthia, if you want to click, it'll go to a closer up image. Yeah. So this is the mobile. I constructed this mobile by taking sticks back from the savannah, and I suspended each of these twigs by a singular string to the ceiling of the gallery space. And this added kind of a cool effect to the room because as viewers would enter and walk around the space, the mobile would actually move kind of in response to them. And to me, this was very symbolic of how we might not constantly be aware of the savannah, or similarly to other beautiful natural areas in our midst. But what we do in the area surrounding these gorgeous ecosystems does affect them in a certain way. So, kind of as people were walking around the room, this mobile shifted in response to their movements. I preserved plants from the different seasons. So, suspended from this mobile are spring, winter, and fall plants. You're going to notice that I really focused on the spring, winter, and fall simply because those were the times when I was doing my research, and so I got a lot of inspiration and experience when putting that into my art. I wanted to make sure that I preserved plants that really added the different color and beauty to the different seasons in the savannah. And I think I did that pretty successfully here with this mural or mobile and putting that into that space. So here again is that big look at the gallery space. Another thing I want to point out is that TV that you can see, which is on the wall with the windows. This TV was playing a constant video loop of some of the more interesting video footage that I had collected off of my field cameras. Um, this was really neat because it gave visitors the chance to really see up close and personal a lot of animals that the savanna supports and animals which would be too skittish for them to ever see up close like a field camera allows you to. It also, I think, stood as a testament of how much wildlife, just even beyond birds, the savannas support and why they're important places that we keep around. And then another thing that you probably recognize is that I hung up my trays on the wall. So these were the actual trays that I built and used in my study. They had been through 4 seasons of research at this point, so they were pretty weathered and battered, and they really showed the love that went into this research. Scientific equipment. If you want to click again, this is like my whole platform. I set it up on its side because it was too tall. It would like go through the ceiling. So I set it on its side in the corner of the gallery space. And this again gave visitors an idea of the kind of scale of scientific equipment sometimes, um, how specialized it was for the kind of work that I was doing, and it was representative of my research, but also the kind of love and work that goes into research of any kind when you're trying to learn more about a beautiful place and how to best protect it. And then the last thing that I want to point out, you actually can't see in this picture, but there was an audio loop also playing surround sound around this space, and this audio I recorded towards the summertime in the savannah, so it brought in that 4th season, and it featured a lot of the beautiful bird songs and the choirs of insects and the wind and all of these beautiful savannah sounds. I wanted to appeal to as many senses of my viewers as I could and just engage them in as many ways, making them feel like they were as close as they could be to the savannah without actually being in the savannah. All right, so these are my banners. You could see those hanging up on the wall in the last slide, but I wanted to have like a closer up so you could really see all the details. These have became like my baby during this project. They're 2 feet tall and they're 6 feet, or they're 2 feet wide and 6 feet tall, excuse me, and they're acrylic paint on duck cloth. So there are 3 of them, one to represent fall, one to represent winter, and one to represent spring. And as I was going about figuring out what style maybe I wanted to do these banners in, I I really was drawn to a folk art style. And the reason is because throughout generations and across different societies, folk art, of varying styles, of course, has been a way that common people have been able to relate to their natural areas around them and express their love for and connection for these areas. So I very much wanted to pay homage to that in these banners. If you want to click through a couple, I also, of course, studied birds, and I'm biased towards birds. I love them. So I wanted to make sure that they were the star of the show in these pieces. The birds that you see in the sky around each of my little suns there are the birds that actually came to my platforms. I saw them on my field footage camera, so I wanted to definitely place them in there as sort of the center of the pieces. Of course, red-headed woodpeckers, even though they weren't really seen coming to my platforms, are still a huge part of the savanna. They're savanna specialists. They're what make this place so beautiful and unique. So I included them up in the trees, behaving like woodpeckers do. And then I also wanted to make sure that I included a lot of the plant life in these pieces as well. So, of course, especially here in the Midwest, where we have 4 starkly different seasons, the plants are what add the color and the aestheticism and the beauty to each of those seasons. So I picked a few plant species that I felt like really represented the colors of the savanna really well. So in the fall, that's like the blossoming goldenrod and the orange leaves of the oak trees. In the wintertime, I wanted to emphasize the brush that had kind of lost its green color and had really beautiful shades of brown. And then in the springtime, those are all of the wildflowers, especially cleft phlox and bird's foot violet, I feel are the two flowers that I see just carpeting the savanna in the spring. And those really just add a lot of uniqueness and color to each of the banners. And then the last thing I want to point out are the hands that you see reaching across the bottom of all three of my banners. Um, these hands, I wanted just to represent the community of Pembroke and even like the historical communities before of Pembroke in the area because humans stewarding the land is actually a huge reason why Pembroke savannas still exist at the high quality that they do. So I wanted to um, make sure that they had a piece of this as well because they're a huge piece of the story. I included these hands kind of referencing some of the human activities and agricultural activities that would be going on in the land surrounding Pembroke. But again, they're like a huge piece of the story, so I felt like something was missing without them. Okay, let's move on to some conclusions on moving forward. So, if I were to summarize everything that I've learned so far, it would be that research is very important, of course. Research is able to give us a new understanding. It's able to tell us what problems are existing and why, and offer potential solutions. It's able to help us quantify and understand the natural world better. Um, and it's so important that research is being done, especially in these areas that we're seeing disappear. However, art, I think, is a necessary next step to research. I think that art is essential in acting as a translator for the sciences. I think now more than ever, it's so important that we have public support with all of these ecological issues. And art is able to explain in a way that the general public can understand why we should care. It's able to pull on our emotions and perhaps most importantly, it's allowed to create conversations in areas where conversations might not have previously been able to exist. Okay, so one way that I saw this firsthand was in my gallery talk. So, towards the end of my exhibition, I was able to host a gallery talk where I invited basically anyone who would listen to come and observe my art and be able to listen to me speak about it and why it's significant and important. And then at the end of my talk, I was able to host a Q&A, so people were able to ask whatever questions they might have lingering about the art or about the beautiful places that the art was based off of. Something that was super inspiring to me about this gallery talk is that it drew in an extremely diverse crowd. I saw people from ages 13 to 92 represented, so we had people from all generations there. And then among my college student or college friends that were able to make it, I counted at least 10 majors, but there were quite a few people that I didn't know that were there, and so I'm sure it's more than 10 majors. But that was really great to see because the hope is that people are going to be hearing these stories and they're going to be inspired by them, and then they're going to bring those stories back into the little pockets of society that they are from, different interest groups, different generations, etc. I was also so excited by the questions that were being asked in the Q&A. I had a lot of people surprisingly asking about scientific methodology. I definitely didn't expect that. I was sort of thinking that people would be talking more about the art because it was an art show, but people were actually really curious about the science behind things. I think a huge piece of that is that there was actual scientific equipment in the room with us, and that made people really curious because they were very foreign things. Also, I had people ask questions about conservation. What are we doing to keep the savannas around? And I was able to tell many people for the first time that fire is actually a really great tool that we use to keep the savannas, and offer up some more insight about that towards the crowd as well. And then lastly, and this was the most rewarding thing for me, is that there were several people who are actually interested in visiting. I know, at least for me personally, like the story of the savannah, the realness of it didn't sink in until I was actually there, experiencing it, hearing the sounds, smelling the smells, and just knowing that someone might have been inspired and excited enough to want to go out and actually have that experience for themselves, which just there's no words that I can put to how exciting that is. Okay. Okay, so in addition, I've been doing some further work with integrating art and science, and that's been really awesome. So soon after my art exhibition was all over and that was all wrapping up, I was actually approached by a couple professors at my school, and they were inquiring about potentially doing a mural. So, for a little bit of context, in my science hall at my old university, there's like a corner where there are two lab classrooms, and students aren't allowed to bring their backpacks into lab. So, they just sort of dump them in the corner, and it becomes like a tripping hazard. So, they wanted to solve that problem by putting backpack hooks on the wall where students could hang their backpacks. But instead of just doing hooks on a wall, they wanted to make things a little bit exciting. And then they had this idea of turning the hooks into sort of a phylogenetic tree where each hook would be on a different organism. So students would be able to put their backpacks up on the red algae and they'd be able to use that to remember, oh, that's where my backpack is. So many of you are familiar with this phylogenetic tree, and I'm going to show you what we sort of turned this concept into. So this is what the final product ended up looking like. I had help from another artist on the actual trunk of the tree, and then all of the organisms were painted by me. There's a close-up of my blue crab. So when we were going about this art project, being that it was so scientifically heavy, we had a few things in mind that we wanted to make sure we were implementing into this work. If you want to click. So the first thing is we wanted to make sure it was accurate and educational. Of course, when you're integrating scientific topics into a visual piece of art, it's super important that you're not sacrificing that accuracy for just beauty or aestheticism. So we spent a lot of time beforehand mapping out which organisms we wanted to include and where we wanted them to be, just to make sure that they were all related to each other in a correct way. And then, of course, especially when you're doing this sort of thing in a scientific environment where scientists are going to be around it constantly, you want to make sure that nothing's going to bother them about the way the organisms are organized on the tree. The second thing is it was so important to us that it was applicable to the space. We decided to do this mural like in a corner so that the tree had this three-dimensional effect, as well as so that we could use both walls for backpack hooks. And then when figuring out where exactly we wanted to place the organisms, we did a lot of measuring to make sure they would be far enough away so that we could space hooks, just so that everyone would have room to put their backpack up, next to each other. And then the last thing is that we, of course, wanted this to be visually appealing because it is art and it is supposed to be beautiful. I put a lot of time into just making sure that I varied the colors and I made things interesting enough so that this is a very traffic heavy part of the school. When visitors come through or when students are waiting for lab, they have something kind of nice to be looking at. And I think we accomplished all three of these goals pretty well. And then the last thing I want to talk about quick is just this little homework assignment that I did for one of my art classes. So this was an art class. We were in a collage unit, and there's a specific collage style called Dada. I believe it was born after World War II, and it sort of evolved to be a style that captures different issues of society and brings attention to those issues. So our assignment for this piece was to come up with an issue of society that we wanted to talk about, and then create this collage. So just to be clear, I didn't like really draw most of this stuff on here. These are just images that I placed together. And again, it was just like a very casual homework assignment. So, of course, a lot of people did things like mental health or the way that technology affects us in our society. I, being a zoology student, decided I wanted to talk about pigeons. So, my piece centered around the relationship between people and pigeons. Many of you probably know, but just in general, we domesticated pigeons in the past. We used them in agriculture and war for meat. They were like human companions. And then when technology sort of advanced beyond pigeons, we kind of just left them out on the streets, which is why we have a huge feral pigeon problem, especially in a lot of urban areas. So the goal of my collage was to contrast some old school depictions of pigeons in art, our love for pigeons, the way that pigeons were war heroes and did all these great things for humans, and then contrast that with the modern day approach that we have to pigeons, some headlines of how pigeons have been hurt by humans and kind of how they now have this reputation of being pests and sky rats. And in art classrooms, if you've ever been in an art class, you know that critiques are a really big deal. So we print out all our pieces, we put them on the wall, and then we talk about what's done really well and what we could do better. For my critique, though, I was very surprised, but also inspired by what happened. We started off with just a normal critique, but then the conversation shifted away from the art, and we started talking about pigeons and the problems that they face and the problems that other domesticated animals face. And the art students were super intrigued by it, and it was all started by this like very simple little casual piece of art that I created. So again, it just really goes to show that in any environment, art can really be a conversation starter for a lot of these important topics. Right. Okay, and then here are my references. Um, and then if you want to go to the next one, this is my contact information. So like I said, I'm like fresh out of school. I'm always looking for people to connect with, for opportunities, for friends to make in this field. So please don't hesitate, even if you just want to say hi. I'd love to say hi. So both of these are really great ways that you can get in touch with me. All right, and then that is all I have for you today. But I believe we have time for questions. So if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability.
Paige, thank you so much. And just a reminder that this is Paige Terpstra, and this will is being recorded and will be on our YouTube channel. PSCC has a YouTube channel. Conservation Connector is the list where you can go see a whole bunch of different programs over the past 2+ years. And Paige, I can't thank you enough for joining us. Again, Paige was speaking about Savanna stories, how combining research and art can help our local ecosystems. And I heard Paige speak in September at a conference and was just taken by you, as I know everyone else is. And so let's have some Q&A before we have to close up at 4 o'clock. If you have a question, please feel free to come off mute and come onto camera. There were a couple, Sandy let me know in the chat, which I will go look at right now.
Awesome.
Let's see, for Matthew, how many total acorn selection events were there for tufted titmouse?
I'd have to go back to my data to see the exact amount, but I want to say that it was, I think, six in one season and like two or three in the other, so it really wasn't that much. And oftentimes I noticed they would start making selections after the Blue Jays really had done a lot of activity. So I'm not sure entirely why that is. I'm wondering if it's because Blue Jays are a lot larger and they tend to be very dominant species. So maybe they were trying to avoid each other. But that is something that I noticed. That was kind of cool to note.
And a question about the pin oaks, were they
Mm,
northern or southern pin oaks?
they're northern, I believe.
And let's see, Jeff says another good example of why art should be part of STEAM. Great work and presentation. And
Thank you.
thank you from Catherine.
Thank you.
So any other questions from anyone? And again, feel free to let Paige see you. So she's in a room with people. What are you working on now? And I'm sure,
Okay.
yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So, recently I've started doing some tutoring. So I've been doing a lot of tutoring and definitely working on a lot of independent projects. So, I'm trying to think specifically. I make a lot of Christmas projects or Christmas presents for people in my life. So I've been working on like a set of 12 art pieces for like a calendar and things. But beyond that, yeah, life's been pretty quiet these past couple months for sure.
It's on the speaking tour now because
I guess so,
yeah,
right?
yes, absolutely. I mean, I know that your example of combining your research with art is just huge for the conservation community. You
Mhm.
know, we need ways to connect with the general public, with people, to get them inspired to protect natural areas. And it's not necessarily something a lot of us work in that space. And I think you've inspired me so much, which is why I really was excited to have you come on this program. And I know that through our organization, which is a coalition of organizations around the state, you will be getting that message out more. And with your spirit and enthusiasm and passion for this, you're just so inspiring. Yeah. So, and anybody else?
Thank you. That means a lot.
Absolutely.
Oh, I had a question if we have time for one more.
Please. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, we do. We have 11 minutes.
Oh, great. First of all, I love your banners. They're so beautiful. And
thank
it's
you.
amazing how many different elements are incorporated so cohesively. It's a really beautiful representation of the ecosystem. My question was about your study. When you're making your boards, did you adjust the size of the holes relative to the size of the acorns, or were they all the same size holes?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. They were all the same size holes. So when I was doing this, I based it off of a couple prior studies that I had seen, where the birds were able to get all of the acorns from the size holes that they were doing. So I just like kind of replicated that as well. Um, but yeah, they're about like 2.5 centimeters wide, like in diameter, and then I believe 2 centimeters deep. So they were all about the same size.
Okay, very cool. Thank you.
Of course.
Any other questions or comments even or sharing what if there are some not specific for Paige, but has anybody worked in this combining art and science to connect with the public? Are there any organizations represented here today that have other examples of how you perhaps have done that, or has this inspired some ideas? Don't be shy. Come off mute. So there's an example of something, a lot of opportunity there. Let's see, fellow science major and art minor. I use it a lot to teach nature journaling, which is popular in the field. Oh, yes.
That's beautiful.
I was
Something
just, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Something I love about the arts too is that it doesn't have to be just visual art. Like, I'm a visual artist, but I've seen some really amazing work done, like musically. There's this one music artist, Cosmo Sheldrake, who he incorporates a lot of bird song and insect noise and things into his music and just different ways to like be able to integrate those things. It doesn't have to be visual art. You can build something or write something or sing something. So that's another thing that I think is great is it's so there's no limits to it. It's art, right? So you can do things however like speaks to you the most.
That's
I
a
worked,
very good point. Yes.
I worked with, I'm retired now from teaching, but I was at Aurora University and then I had a couple students that did similar projects. One student was dual major in art and science, and she did a project with invasive species in the Great Lakes, mostly photography. I think it's a wonderful area to be in that you're in. Something I recently took a trip to Alaska, and um, I think it's the Park District in Alaska has a sponsored internship for artists to work with naturalists. Something to think about.
Ah, that sounds like an amazing opportunity. And I can only imagine how much there is to work with in Alaska too. It's so beautiful and so unique. There's nowhere in the world like it.
I agree. Yeah, it was my first time there, and it's beyond anything I've seen before. I've traveled a lot.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Alex, do you want to share what you put down in the chat? Your watercolors?
Oh, sure. It's not nearly as conceptual, but I love to try to capture the spirit of what something will look like rather than just species names. So I make, my bloom time charts and the species lists are illustrated in watercolor, and then I'll try to loosely represent in watercolor what things are going to look like rather than sticking to just Excel sheets. There's also Excel sheets, but it's painted too.
Oh, that sounds magnificent. I'd love to see some of your work sometime if you'd ever want to share. We can exchange.
You may need to start a group, not,
Yeah,
an art and science group to share. And
definitely.
Linda, do you want to come off mute and talk about the Art of the Land program, which I've been to many times?
Hi, I'm Glenda, actually. I don't know why my name's coming up as Linda.
Oh yeah, that was interesting.
I don't know why that
That's
happened.
not Glenda. Linda.
But yeah, we've been hosting Art of Land. This year was 17 years. Next year will be 18 years. We do it at the Starline Factory in Harvard, Illinois. And basically the theme of the show is art that reflects our local landscape. So, basically anything you would see in the Midwest, we don't want to see like camels or mountains or those types of things, but that's what we feature, and it's been a good fundraiser for us for almost 18 years now. So,
Wow,
If
that's
you'll
so
humor me, I'm going to show you a piece of your artwork that I
oh, good.
and it's dangerous when you go, bring your money.
Oh,
Oh,
And it reminds me of Pembroke and the Black
that's
Oak
beautiful.
Savannah.
that's
It totally
beautiful.
captures
Isn't
that
that?
space.
Thank you for letting me share. We have a group now.
When does your show take place?
It's gonna be October, I think 23rd and 24th of next year. So, we kind of mess around with the dates some years, but we decided October has been good the last few years. So, so yeah, we're always looking for if you ever want, I can put my email down in the chat and I can add you to our list to be notified of if you want to be an artist or an artisan at the event.
That'd be great.
Definitely, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, Paige,
Okay,
you would
yeah,
just
I'll put my email in the chat. So and then just email me and I'll get you on the list, whoever's interested. Oops.
yeah, and
Thank
they
you.
just have, everything from earrings, which of course I have come away with, to paintings and many other things, but you would be such a compliment to that event.
Aw,
Yeah, it would be great. Yeah, we love having new artists. We also have a youth art competition for those of you who have kids or friends with kids who want to who want to participate too. So.
It's wonderful. Some of the other, things that I've seen is for like school groups, for earth clubs and that sort of thing, combining what they're learning, including science, with being out in nature, so outdoor classrooms. So that's kind of another place where, they're looking at how do we can do math while, looking at this, certain plants and collecting seeds or whatever. So that's kind of, a whole other age group to really connect with when we're talking about science and nature.